Hey everyone, Andrea Walford here. In this video, I'm going to show you how I created this Nailed It Happy Father's Day card featuring Stampin' Up's Nailed It stamp set and coordinating Build It framelits. So let's get started. So I have here a scrap piece of watercolor paper, and I'm going to be stamping the hammer and the screwdriver stamp from Stampin' Up's Nailed It stamp set, and this comes from the 2017 Occasions mini catalog. I absolutely fell in love with this stamp set the minute I saw it, and even after it retires, because unfortunately it did not make it into the new catalog, this is going to be one of those sets that I'm going to keep and I can see myself using over and over again. So I'm going to be using my Stampin' jig because whenever you work on the watercolor paper, it has a bit of a texture to it as compared to the regular Whisper White cardstock. So oftentimes when you stamp your image, stamping it just once, you're not going to get a nice crisp impression. Now I don't need the actual imaging sheet portion that goes with my Stampin' jig because it doesn't necessarily matter where I'm placing it. I just need to be able to double stamp it. And because I'm going to be doing a watercolor type technique with this, I do want to make sure that the ink that I'm using is a permanent ink, so it's not going to bleed when it comes in contact with moisture. So I'm inking up my stamp, and then I'm going to stamp it. Now I do want to leave enough room around it that I can die cut it. So I'm going to stamp. I'm just going to tuck my Stampin' jig into the corner here. And then I'm going to lift. And I actually got a pretty good impression, but I do want to darken it up just a little bit. So I'm going to re-ink my stamp, and now I'm making sure that my Stampin' jig does not shift, and then I'm going to tuck this back into the corner, and I'm going to stamp like so. And you can see now I have an image that has a much bolder outline. So now I'm going to stamp my hammer image. Now you do have to make sure, of course, that not only does your Stampin' jig not shift, you don't want your cardstock to shift either. I'm working on a fairly slick surface, so I could tape it down if I wanted, my paper down if I wanted to, but in this case I'm just hanging on to it with my finger. So I'm tucking my T-tool. Now here, my Stampin' jig is actually on quite a big area of my watercolor paper, so it's holding it in place. But before, when I was stamping closer to the edge of my paper, my Stampin' jig wasn't holding a lot of it in place, so I did make sure I anchored it with my thumb. And then, once again, I'm double stamping. You can see that I get a much darker image. Now, I did get a little bit of bleeding here, and I'm not sure exactly why that is. Well, actually, you know, it could be because the texture of the paper is pulling the ink a little bit and causing it to feather. So we're going to try this again and see if I get an image that I like better. If not, I'll just go with that one. Well, it's not too bad. It's not bleeding, so let's see now if I do this a second time. I won't press super hard, and we'll see if that works. And that's better. So you can see I did not end up with that kind of feathering like I did here. And I'm not sure if that's because I pressed too hard or there was just a bit too much ink and it bled out into the pattern. But either way, we now have two good images that we can work with. So my next step is going to be to color these in. Now actually, I just remembered that this stamp set comes with these super cute little faces, so I'm going to put a little happy face on each of the tools I stamped before I go ahead and color them. And again, you do want to make sure you use waterproof ink for this. Now in this case, I am using my Stampin' jig because I want to make sure that it gets placed exactly where I want it. So you can see I have one cute little face, and let's give this guy one. I wonder if this one might work. We're going to try this one and just see. I'm going to put him on my imaging sheet and just see. I think he's more meant for the saw because the saw is much bigger, but it would be interesting to see if this guy would fit. Oh, and he does. Look at that. Do I like him on the hammer? Or do I like him on the hammer? I think I'm going to go with this guy. Of course, you don't have to put these guys on if you don't like them, but I do think they're kind of cute. So there we go. So now we're going to color in our images. So now the two colors that I'm going to use to color in my tools are my Delightful Dijon, and this is one of the in colors that's retiring this year. And then I have my Smoky Slate. Now you could use one of two tools to actually do the watercoloring. You could use your blender pen and you can use the aqua painter. Now generally my preference tends to be, well, depending on the technique I want. If I want something that's really soft and watery, I will use my aqua painter here. And otherwise, if I want a little bit more control, I will tend to use my blender pen. And the basic difference is that you're going to get a lot more fluid coming from your aqua painter than you are from your blender pen. And because I have not embossed my lines, I do want to make sure that the water does not go spreading out and extending beyond the edges of the lines. Even though I'm going to be die cutting it, I still don't want the water extending beyond this. So I think what I may actually do is I may do a bit of a combination. I think the last few times I've demonstrated watercoloring, I've used my blender pen. So let's actually try the aqua painter and let's just see how it goes. I can always restamp, I guess, if I don't like it. And I'm going to start with the piece that I want in silver. So that's going to be the actual screwdriver tip and then the hammer head. So whenever you are watercoloring and you are using your classic ink pads, you always want to make sure that you create a little palette or a pool of ink. So you never dip the tip of your tool, whether it's your aqua painter or your blender pen, onto the actual surface of your ink pad. So what we do is, you can see I've popped it open and I've simply done that by pushing back, and then I'm just going to squeeze it together like this. And what this will do is it'll press the actual ink pad against the inside of my lid and it gives me a pool of ink. So then what I can do is I can pick up my ink with my aqua painter and then I can proceed to color this in. And as you can probably see, you actually do not need to pick up a lot of ink on the tip of your aqua painter, because otherwise you're just going to end up with, especially when you're working in a very small area like this, you're going to end up with just one solid color, and you're not going to leave yourself room to add some depth to your image. And you add your depth by adding shadows. So I'm just going to dip my tip into this ink again, and I'm just going to come in and I'm going to add just a little bit in select areas. Now you want to make sure that you don't squeeze your aqua painter too much, because I'm starting to get too much water, and I actually was not really squeezing it, but that's the thing that I don't particularly, or I guess, yeah, that I don't like about the aqua painter, is that I find that even when you don't squeeze it, it's hard to control the water. Now as you can see, I blotted it, but to pick up the water, but of course when you blot it, you pick up some of the color too. So because this now is getting super wet, I think I'm just going to go back to my blender pen. Just more control with the blender pen. But now I have to let that dry. So let's try this one here. So as you can see, I picked up a little bit of color with the tip of my aqua painter. And then I'm just starting in the top left corner and worked with broad strokes moving down to the bottom left. And I'm just layering on the color. Now you don't want to go over it too many times because then your paper will get pilled. So I'm going to let that dry. And now let's start working here where the hammerhead is. And once you pick up ink, it's only going to go so far. So as you can see, I'm picking it up and I'm starting here. But even as I'm moving across my image, you can see I'm kind of losing my ink there, which means I have to reload. Now if I reload and start here, I want to make sure that I kind of start, I guess, at the edge so that I can maintain a little bit of that gradient here. So I'm starting at the edge and then pulling it down. So there you can see how that looks. And this one I may just add a tiny little bit more here. And then now let's go back to this guy here. And we'll just add, he doesn't give you a very big, it's because it's not a very big surface, you don't have a big area in which to shade, but I'll just add kind of a little shading up there, a little shading down there. And then just kind of blend that out a little bit where I ended up with waterline. So there you can see what that looks like. Now, because obviously the tip of a tool would be silver, it would have a little bit of shine to it, but I don't have a silver ink. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my Wink of Stella pen and I'm just going to brush a very thin layer of that, and I'm not even sure if the camera picks it up, but I want to brush just a very thin layer of that over the surface. And this is the clear Wink of Stella. And I'm not even squeezing, I'm just really, whatever is still in my tip, I gave it a good shake, and whatever's there from the last time I used it, that's all that's there. And I'm using the tip to kind of spread that around. So I don't know if you can kind of see that, but then it gives that really pretty little shimmer. Okay, so now I'm ready to color the handle. Now I have a little bit more of a surface area to work with, so I am going to see if I can work with my aqua painter. I am not squeezing it at all. I do not have a lot of water in my barrel. I'm adding water to my ink here to create just kind of a little pool of ink. And then I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply a light, even layer of color all over the entire surface, and then I will let that dry. It's a little bit easier to apply an even layer of color with the aqua painter than it is with the blender pen, because you probably saw with the blender pen how it starts to fade out when we were coloring the hammer. So with the aqua painter, at least, I can apply a nice even layer of color, and then I can come back with the blender pen and I can add some shadows to the area that I would like. Now I could come back with the aqua painter as well, but remember how I said it's a little bit more challenging because you can't control the water. So if you have, and I actually, you know what, I find that how much water comes out also sometimes depends on the aqua painter itself. For some aqua painters, they're great, and I don't know, mine are kind of old, so it could be that that's why I have my issues with the water flow. But now I'm coming up, picking some more concentrated color. I'm going to see if I can add my shading like that. And certainly you do get a little bit of a different effect when you use your aqua painter, which I really like. So let's see. Now when you're working wet on dry, you do have to be careful because, meaning my first layer has dried already, and now I'm adding another layer of water. But if you just add water in one segment, what can happen is that you can end up with harsh water lines. So you almost have to kind of work the entire area again. I'm not applying much pressure as I'm adding my color. Sort of trying to let the water pull the color. And now I think I'm going to add just a tiny little bit over here. Blotting off that extra color and then just kind of blending it out a little bit. So there you can see how we have that nice dimension. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to let that dry. And it's not going to take very long to dry. So you can either let it air dry, or if you have a heat tool, you can speed up the drying process by using your heat tool on the low setting. So I'm just going to give this a second to dry, and then we're going to set up the dies and I'm going to die cut it. Okay, so my images are now dry. I'm going to be using the coordinating Build It framelits that come with this, or that coordinate with the stamp set. You purchase them separately, but they are available in a bundle. And I'm going to place it on top. And as you can see, it pretty much just fits. So it does leave kind of a teeny little bit of a border. So you do, but not a big one. So you do want to make sure that as you're aligning this over top of your image, you really take a few minutes to take care in positioning it. And then once you're happy with the placement, it's helpful to hold it in place with a little bit, you can use like a little bit of washi or a little bit of low tack tape. I do have the magnetic platform for my Big Shot, but I still find that with the magnetic platform, I don't always get a nice strong grip because my cutting plate is a little bit warped. And so I don't always get a good strong grip. And when it's something like this where precise placement is really important, you don't want your die to shift at all. If I'm just die cutting a shape out of cardstock, well then that's okay. I don't have to worry about being as precise as to where it is. But when you're die cutting an actual stamped shape, and precision is important, in that case I like to take an extra precaution by holding my die in place with some low tack tape. So there you can see what that looks like, and I'm now going to run this through my Big Shot. So I'm back for my Big Shot, and you can see we now have our two pieces that have been die cut. So now what I want to do is I want to stamp the Happy Father's Day image, but I want to stamp it onto black cardstock and then heat emboss it in white. So I'm going to start by taking my embossing buddy, and I'm going to run it over my cardstock. And the embossing buddy is just an anti-static bag, and it places a powder on your surface. And what that does is minimize the static and helps minimize the amount of embossing powder that's going to stick where you don't want it to stick. Next, I'm going to take my Whisper White ink pad, and I'm going to ink up my stamp, and then I'm going to stamp it. And I'm just using my Stamp-A-Majig. I don't think I need to stamp it a second time, but I always put my Stamp-A-Majig there just in case I want that option. Next, I'm going to place this over a coffee filter, and then I'm going to sprinkle on my embossing powder. And the coffee filter is simply as a catch-all, so I can tip my embossing powder into there, and then I can flip my cardstock over, and I give it a flick a few times on the back to try to get rid of excess embossing powder. Now you can see that I still had some embossing powder sticking here. So let me first just take this and funnel this back in here. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I'm going to place it on top of my coffee filter, and I have this very fine round brush, and I'm going to use the tip of it to brush off these stray flecks of embossing powder. So I've brushed the embossing powder off as best I could, and now I'm going to heat it with my heat tool to melt the embossing powder. So I'm using my Stampin' Up! Heat tool. It has two settings, 1 and 2. And 1 is generally used when you're drying ink, 2 I use when I'm embossing. So I'm going to hold it about an inch above my embossing powder, and then I'm going to heat it until it melts. And you know it's ready when it loses this kind of granular look and becomes shiny and smooth. So I'm not going to do this on camera simply because the embossing tool is kind of loud. So here you can see what that looks like. So now I'm going to take my die, and that is from my same framelits, and I'm going to position it over top of my sentiment, and then I'm going to hold it in place with some of that same low tack tape. Now with this one, you can see it leaves a little bit more of a border. And I'm placing my tape in a few more places because with heat embossing, generally it will warp your cardstock a little bit. So there you can see how that looks. So now I'm going to die cut that with my Big Shot, and I will be back. And I'm back for my Big Shot, and there you can see how that looks. So now I'm ready to assemble my card base. Now for my card, I have a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch card, which I created out of Whisper White thick cardstock, and this is a top folding card. I have a piece of pattern paper from the Urban District DSP collection that is 3 1/2 by 5 1/2. It's actually a little bit longer than 5 1/2. And then I have a strip here that's 1/2 an inch wide, and again, a little bit longer than 5 1/2 inches, because I'm just going to trim it afterwards. But what I want to do is to initially create a panel of pattern paper. So I'm first going to make sure that it's aligned along the top edge and along the right hand edge. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my glue and I'm going to squeeze some underneath half of it. And then I'm going to stick it down. Then I'm going to flip this, and now I'm going to lift this up, and I'm going to do the same thing on this side. So why am I doing it this way? Because I find that it's easier to make sure it's exactly where I want it to be. You don't have a lot of drying time with your glue. You do have a little bit of leeway, but when you're sticking a panel on, sometimes it can be hard to align it with the edges of your card. So this way I align it first and then I glue it. So now I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick this down first. And this is a circle I die cut using the largest smooth-sided die from the Layering Circles framelits. And I'm going to stick this down kind of like that, because I want this to go like this. Then I'm going to take my 1/2 inch piece and I'm going to stick this down. I'm just going to turn this sideways because I'm aligning it here with the edge of my card, like so. So there you can see how that looks. So now I'm just going to take this to my paper trimmer and I'm going to trim that, and I will be back. So I'm back, and now what I want to do is I want to stick this kind of like this. So I want it to slightly overlap my circle. And then I'm going to stick these two little guys down like this. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some nail stamps like so, or yeah, this nail image like so. And I'm just going to clean the edge of my stamp because I did pick up some ink. So I'm inking it up in my Memento Tuxedo Black ink, like so. And now let's get this guy back here. And I don't know if I want that there. This guy is going to come a little bit lower. And so then I think what I'm going to do down here is I'm just freehand stamping some little screws like that. So now I can go ahead and, how did I have that now? I think it was, see that? I don't even remember. It was tucked. And then this guy, I think I'm going to stick. Like that. Now, I'm feeling like I need something there, but what I don't know is if I want to stamp it or if I want to use my Urban Underground embellishments. Let's try this. I'm not going to stick it down like super heavily, just so that if I don't like it, I think I'm going to stick that down there. And I'm probably only going to put one because you can see what I've done here is I've created this visual triangle. There was something that looked off balance without it. So I'm going to put that there. Now I suppose theoretically I could put another one, except that I think it would be too much. I think this is enough to create the visual triangle and it fills that white space. So there you can see how my card looks and it's now finished. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial and I look forward to stamping with you again. See ya!